There are things you inherit without asking. Your mother's eyes, your father's temper, and sometimes something that doesn't belong to either of them. Something older, something patient, something that doesn't run in your blood, it swims. Welcome back, travelers of the unseen, to the place where folklore breathes, history bleeds, and the past never quite dies right. Tonight's story isn't just about a haunted house, it's about a haunted you. Families pass down recipes, heirlooms, trauma like it's a treasured antique, but some pass down something hungrier. Not metaphorically, I mean teeth in the dark whispering through your dreams, hungry. In certain corners of the world, they don't say it runs in a family, they say it feeds there. Take the bloodline of Giles de Reyes, a nobleman, a war hero, a man who fought beside saints and became something saints would pray against. After his execution in 1440, whispers didn't die with him, they multiplied. Generations later, descendants were said to suffer violent compulsions, nightmares soaked in iron, children speaking to the tall man in armor who stood at the foot of their beds. Imagine inheriting a last name, and with it, a shadow that refuses eviction. That's the thing about curses. They don't care if you believe in them, they believe in you. In parts of rural Japan, there's stories of families marked by something they call Chin no Nori, a blood curse. Not dramatic, not flashy, just consistent. Every generation, one child. Always one. They begin normal, laughing, playing, existing, and then one day, they start remembering things they never lived. A drowning that happened 200 years ago, a fire, a betrayal, a death that was never forgiven. Some say this traces back to vengeful spirits like Oiwa, whose rage didn't end with her life. It learned how to linger. In these families, mirrors are covered early. Dogs refuse to enter certain rooms. And grandparents don't tell bedtime stories, they issue warnings. Don't answer if it calls your name twice, because the first time might be curiosity. The second time, that's recognition. Europe doesn't do subtle curses, they go theatrical. Enter the legend of Bathory bloodline, tied to Elizabeth Bathory, often called the Blood Countess, a woman accused of bathing in blood to preserve youth. History debates the truth, but folklore? Folklore sharpened its teeth and smiled. Some say some say her family line carried more than a reputation. Madness, sudden violence, obsession with purity, with control, with blood itself. Descendants reported strange illnesses, unexplained deaths, and a reoccurring dream. A woman watched them from a bath that never empties. Luxury, but make it cursed. You don't just inherit wealth, you inherit the bill. In parts of Appalachia, in the American South, there's a quieter kind of horror. No castles, no famous names, just families who don't go out after dark. Not because they're scared, but because something else expects them not to. Stories tell of deals made generations ago. Land for protection, success for loyalty, and loyalty? A contract that doesn't expire. Children in these families are told never to whistle at night, never look too long into the woods, and never, ever acknowledge footsteps that match their own step for step, just behind them. Not all curses scream, Some just keep pace. Now let's play skeptic for a moment. Psychology calls it generation trauma. Gener- Genetics call it inherited predisposition, which is comforting until it isn't. Because trauma doesn't usually knock on doors at 3:07 a.m., appear in photographs it wasn't invited to, or teach a child a language no one in the house speaks. At some point, logic starts sweating, and folklore leans back like, "You good?" Here's the uncomfortable question. What if curses aren't rare? What if they're just quiet, blending in as a bad luck, as just the way things are, as that one thing every family has but never explains? The uncle no one talks about, the room no one uses, the pattern no one breaks. What if curses isn't dramatic because it doesn't need to be? It already won. You can change your name, move across oceans, start over 100 times, but blood remembers. And if something ancient ever decides to make a home there, it's not renting, it owns. So tonight, when you turn off the lights and the house settles into that uneasy silence, ask yourself one question. Are you living your life or continuing someone else's? Because something did choose your bloodline. It's not chasing you, it's already inside. Every cursed bloodline has an origin story. And like origin stories, someone thought they were getting away with something. In ancient Rome, there were whispered accounts of familia damnata, condemned families, not legally, not officially, spiritually. A betrayal, a murder, a broken oath to a God who did not believe in forgiveness as a concept. The punishment, not lightning, not plague, continuation. Children born into misfortune so consistent it stopped looking like a coincidence and started looking like a design. Homes that burned twice, weddings that ended in funerals, infants who cried at empty corners, like they recognized the architect of their suffering. Because a curse doesn't punish the guilty, it builds a legacy out of them. Names carry weight. Some carry warning labels. In Scotland, there are tales of families tied to the legend of Black Anus, a night hag, f- a night hag figure said to adopt bloodlines instead of children. Generation after generation, members of certain families reported the same thing: a woman with a stretched smile and a hand that didn't quite end where they should, watching them from thresholds. Doorways, windows, mirrors, always at the edge of entering, but never quite crossing, because she didn't need to. She wasn't trying to get in. She already had a key. Family members would experience sleep paralysis, but shared. Multiple people, same night, same figure. Scratches appear in identical patterns across different relatives miles apart. Children describing the tall mother who wasn't their mother, but insisted she was. Imagining Imagine inheriting a surname and something else answers to it. Japan doesn't rush its horror, it lets it steep. There are bloodline hauntings tied to grudges so old they've outlived the language used to curse them. One lesser known pattern involves families tied to drowned villages, places swallowed by reservoirs, or the sea. Descendants of those displaced sometimes report a fear of water they never experienced trauma in. Dreams of dreams of walking through submerged homes, and most disturbingly, being called into water by voices that sound like relatives who never existed. Some folklorists connected this lingering forces similar to Funayore, spirits of the drowned who don't just haunt locations, they haunt lineage. Because if your ancestors fled, something might still be waiting for them to come back, and blood is a map. Let's get uncomfortable. What if a curse doesn't just follow a bloodline? What if it depends on it? There are legends across Eastern Europe of entities that don't attach to individuals, but to reproduction itself. Every child strengthens it, feeds it, carries a slightly clearer version of whatever it's trying to become. Some accounts describe birth birthmarks appearing in the same place for generations, growing more defined each time. Children who speak of a fourth person in family photos, a presence that becomes easier to see, easier to hear, easier to feel with each new birth. Like something is being assembled, piece by piece, generation by generation, not haunting, building. And you thought family planning was stressful. Bloodline curses aren't just folklore, they show up in religious texts too, like uncomfortable footnotes nobody wants to read aloud. In the Bible, there are references to ini- in- iniquity being passed down to unto the third and fourth generation, not metaphorically, literally. A moral debt inherited like an eye color. And if you want a story that feels less like theological and more like a warning wrapped in horror, look at the legacy tied to Cain. Marked, not killed, condemned to wander, but more importantly, to continue. Some interpretations suggest his descendants carried more than just his lineage. They carried the echo of the first violence. And maybe that's the most terrifying part. Not that evil exists, but that it learns early how to survive. Here's where things get quieter, because modern cases don't just get labeled as curses anymore. They get buried under diagnosis, coincidences, unexplained phenomena. But dig just a little, and patterns start tapping onto the glass. Families reporting the same shadow figures seen by multiple generations, decades apart. Repeated tragic accidents at the same age across relatives. Children drawing the same imaginary friend before ever meeting each other. There are even archived cases studied where therapists quietly note patient describes entity as family owned. Family owned. Like a cursed heirloom you can't pawn. Every curse story comes with a question. Can it be stopped? Folklore offers solutions. Rituals, cleansings, exorcisms, apologies to things you really hope are listening. But here's the problem. Breaking a curse often requires confronting the original sin. And what if that sin is forgotten, denied, or worse, repeated? You can't fix what your family refuses to admit happened. And curses thrive in silence. They grow in the dark like mold behind a wall no one wants to tear open. So instead, they decorate around it. Call it bad luck, call it coincidence, call it anything but what it might actually be. Let's end where all good nightmares begin, with you, your family, your history. Because somewhere behind you, whether you believe it or not, there's a line. And that line stretches back through wars, lies, love, betrayal, things forgotten, and things that absolutely were not. You're not just a person, you're a continuation, a living, breathing, to be continued. So the next time something strange happens, something that feels a little too familiar for comfort, don't just ask, why me? Ask something worse. Ask, who did this start with? And then ask something even worse than that. Did it ever actually stop? Because if it didn't, then this isn't your life. It's your turn. And if your dreams feel inherited tonight, just remember some legacies aren't meant to be honored, they're meant to be survived. So let's go into some real cases that they believe this happened. Now, I will put a disclaimer out there. I know some of these, especially the first one I'm about to mention, there's conspiracy theory, especially with government conspiracy theories behind these. As much as I love conspiracy theories, I'm not going to go into those right now. I'm just going to go into the part of the folklore that they believe is actually a family curse. If you'd rather believe that than any of the conspiracy theories, that's fine. I, again, love talking conspiracy theories. If you want to reach out with your own conspiracy theory, let me know. I'd love to hear them. The Phantom Navigator podcast at gmail.com. Power, wealth, influence, and a body count that reads like a slow, method- methodical haunting. The Kennedy family has long been associated with what people call the Kennedy curse. It's easy to dismiss until you line them up. John F. Kennedy, assassin. Robert F. Kennedy, assassinated. Yeah, John F. Kennedy assassinated. Robert F. Kennedy assassinated. John F. Kennedy Jr., plane crash. Multiple relatives lost in accidents, overdoses, unexplained tragedies. Stati- s- statistically impossible, statistically improbable begins to feel statistically personal. Some trace it back to the family patriarch's ruthless ambition. Others whisper something older. That power demands balance. And sometimes blood is the currency. Because when tragedy repeats with the kind of rhythm, it starts to sound less like chance and more like something keeping time. Early 1800s, Tennessee. The Bell family wasn't just haunted, they were targeted. The entity known as the Bell Witch didn't drift through walls aimlessly, it spoke. It names names. It focused almost entirely on one man, John Bell. Witnesses reported disembodied voices holding full conversations, physical attacks on family members, knowledge of private thoughts no outsider should have known. And then John Bell died, poisoned, allegedly, by a mysterious vial found in his home. The entity claimed responsibility, out loud, in front of witnesses. And here's a detail that clings like cobwebs. The Bell Witch promised to return to the family, not the house, the family. Because places don't pass down blood, people do. Royalty doesn't protect you. If anything, it puts a spotlight on the fall. The House of Habsburg ruled vast parts of Europe for centuries, and yet their legacy is often whispered about like a cautionary tale. A so called curse tied to generations of physical deformities, infertility, sudden death, political collapse. The most famous example, Charles II of Spain. So genetically compromised he was nicknamed the Bewitched. He couldn't rule effectively, could barely function. An an empire distilled into a single fragile body. Science points to inbreeding, but folklore leans in and says, or maybe something in that bloodline didn't want them to continue, and eventually it got its wish. Now this is Now this one feels like history playing a game, or something using history as a stage. The so-called Tecumseh curse, tied to Tecumseh and his brother Tenskwata. After conflict with William Henry Harrison, the claim? A curse placed on American presidents elected in years ending in zero. And then the pattern. Harrison, 1840, died in office. Lincoln, 1860, assassinated. Garfield, 1880, assassinated. McKinley, 1900, assassinated. Harding, 1920, died in office. Roosevelt, 1940, died in office. Kennedy, 1960, assassinated. 7 in a row. 7. It finally breaks later, but only after decades of eerie consistency. Coincidence? Maybe. But coincidence doesn't usually commit to a theme. England, 1950s. The Pollock twins case is often cited in discussions of reincarnation, but look at it from another angle, and it starts to feel like something returning through blood. After two sisters died tragically, their parents had twin girls. The twins, the twins recognized locations they never have been to, recalled details of their sisters' lives, had identical birthmarks matching injuries from the deceased. One of them even displayed a fear of cars before understanding what a car was. Reincarnation? Or something tied to the family line, refusing to let go. Because whether it's memory, spirit, or something stranger, it didn't go somewhere else. It came back. There are modern s- psychological case studies, quiet ones, where entire families report the same recurring figure, not similar, the same. One such case documented a tall, shadow-like presence appearing to grandmother, mother, child across 3 generations. Each described identical features, same height, same posture, same behavior. None had discussed it with the others beforehand. Doctors labeled it as shared delusion. But shared delusion doesn't usually wait decades between appearances. Like it's checking in, like it has a schedule, like it knows exactly where to find you. Because it always has. Here's the thing about real cases, they don't come with neat endings. No priest walks in at the final minute, no ancient text explains everything, no voiceover tells you it's safe now. They just stop being recorded. Or worse, they keep going quietly, filed under coincidence, tragedy, unexplained. But patterns don't care what you call them, they just repeat. So now you know. History has families that suffer like clockwork. Cases where something follows blood instead of place. Moments where logic taps out and something older clocks in. So tonight, when you think about your family, don't just think about who they were. Think about what they might have carried and whether, without realizing it, they handed it to you. Because the most dangerous inheritance is the one you don't realize you've already accepted. And if something in your life feels like it didn't start with you, you're probably right. The haunting of the Bell family wasn't subtle, it didn't knock politely, it introduced itself. So let's go ahead and open the evidence locker to some of these cases and talk about what was actually written in some of these was actually put some of these evidence lockers with these cases. Witnesses claimed the entity could speak clearly, sometimes mimicking voices, sometimes using its own. One of the most chilling accounts come from those present near the death of John Bell. I gave old Jack a big dose of that last night, which fixed him. The voice reportedly came from nowhere. No body, no source, just a statement. Not he died, not it's over. I fixed him. Like a job completed, like a task checked off a list. And if something can finish one member of a family, what's to stop it from continuing the work? The Pollock twins case is filled with a small, precise moments that feel too exact to ignore. Their father, John Pollock, documented what his daughters said when they encountered toys they had belonged to their deceased sisters. That's my doll. She hurt her arm. The detail? The original doll had been damaged years before, repaired, put away, forgotten by everyone except the dead. And then there's this. When we died, we went up, but we came back. Not imagination, not a think, just a statement. Simple, like explaining where you've been. Patterns don't speak, but people do. After the assassination of John F. Kennedy, conversations around the so-called Tecumseh curse weren't just folklore anymore. They became uneasy observation, whispered in political circles. Historian accounts note reaction along the lines of, it's happening again, not surprise, recognition. And if history wasn't repeating, but following instructions, and maybe that's what makes a pattern feel like a curse. Not that it exists, but that people start expecting it, waiting for it. In a modern documented psychological cases, language becomes careful, measured, but sometimes something slips through. In one recorded family case involving a reoccurring entity seen across generations, a therapist noted the child's exact words. He said he knew my grandma when she was little. Not prompting, not prior discussion, just a statement dropped into their room like a stone into still water. And when asked what the figure wanted, the child answered, it doesn't want anything, he's just still here. Not aggressive, not demanding, just present. Like furniture, like inheritance. While much of Elizabeth Bathory's story is debated, testimonies recorded during her investigation still carry an unsettling tone. Servants allegedly described her presence in ways that didn't sound entirely human. One account recalls she watched as if she were waiting for something to come out of them. Not anger, not rage, expectation. Like whatever drove her wasn't finished when the act was. And if something waits long enough, sometimes it finds another way to continue. From paranormal investigations archives, there are multiple recorded cases where families report hearing the same voice over decades. One particularly chilling statement came from a mother documenting her child's experiences. It calls her by my childhood nickname, a name the child has never been told, never used in that house. And when asked what that voice sounded like it's smiling. Try to hear that. Not a smile you see, a smile you hear. Here's the thing about witness quotes. They don't just try to convince you. They don't need to. They just exist. Fragments of moments where something slipped through and someone was there to hear it. a voice with no body, a memory with no origin, a presence with no beginning and no intention of ending. And the most unsettling part, these people weren't trying to tell a story, they were trying to explain something they couldn't understand. Which means this isn't folklore performing for you, this is reality glitching. So tonight, listen carefully, not just to the noises in your house, but the patterns in your life, the repeated mistakes, the familiar fears, the thing that feel older than you. Because maybe somewhere along the line, someone in your bloodline heard a voice too. And instead of ending it, they just kept going. And now it knows your name. So let's go look into some court documents of some of these bloodline curses. 1976, New York. The aftermath of the Amityville murders left more than bodies behind. It left a story that tried to crawl into a legal system. During proceedings and later legal discussions surrounding the case, Ronald DeFeo Jr. claimed something that sounded less like a defense and more like a confession wrapped into something else. Once I started, I just couldn't stop. It went so fast. Fast. Detached. Like he wasn't driving, just along for the ride. But what chills deeper is what came out later in associated claims and interviews tied to the house. The voices told me to do it. Courts dismissed it. Instantly, insanity defense territory. But here's a detail that lingers like a fingerprint that won't wipe clean. The killings targeted his family, not strangers, not enemies, his bloodline. If madness explains the act, what explains the direction? 19 1692 Massachusetts. The Salem witch trials weren't just hysteria, they were recorded painfully, methodically. Court transcripts preserve statements that still read like something is speaking through the room. Young accusers, under oath, described encounters in language far beyond their years. From testimony against Bridget Bishop, her shape didn't grievously torment me. Her shape, not her, something wearing her. And again, in multiple depositions, she came to me in the night and pressed me. Pressed. A physical act, described in a courtroom that had no framework for what that meant. Now here's where it bends towards bloodlines. Accusations often ran through families, mothers, daughters, sisters. And if whatever they believed they were seeing was inherited, or at least recognized, because fear spreads fast, but specific fear, that tends to follow a path. The haunting of the Bell family didn't stay oral folklore. It was documented in early written accounts, including sworn statements and later compiled testimonies, treated with near legal seriousness in the 19th century. One chilling recorded claim attributed to the witnesses present near John Bell's death. The voice swore it had poisoned him, not not suspected, not implied, swore, as if it's taking oath, in its own way. And when investigators examined the mysterious vial found in the home, reports noted a drop placed upon the cat's tongue caused its instant death. That detail made it into written record, tested, observed, logged, because even when people didn't understand something, they still wrote it down. And sometimes writing something down doesn't contain it, it preserves it. 1981, Connecticut. For the first time in U.S. legal history, a defense attempted to argue demonic possession as a legal strategy. The case of Arne Cheyenne Johnson. After killing his landlord, Johnson's defense, backed by paranormal investigators Ed Warren and Lorraine Warren, claimed the defendant was under the influence of demonic possession. The court rejected it. Law doesn't have a checkbox for inhabited by something ancient and angry, but witness statements from those present during earlier alleged possession events included descriptions like, he growled, not like a man, and there was something else looking out of him. Not metaphor, observation. And again, this didn't target strangers. The violence erupted within a close circle. The pattern courts don't track, but folklore remembers. Here's where it gets subtle. Modern court cases don't say curse. They say things like history of violence within a family, reoccurring behavioral pattern across generations, unexplained shared delusions, cold language, clinical. But sometimes, buried in transcripts, you'll find lines that feel like they slipped through the cracks. From a recorded family case involving generational trauma and alleged shared apparitions. Each child reports the same figure independently. Independently, that word matters because in court, consistency builds credibility. And when multiple people describe the same impossible thing without influence, it doesn't prove a curse, but it does something worse. It refuses to disprove one. Courtrooms are where we go to make sense of chaos, to draw lines, to assign blame, to say, this is what happened and this is why. But sometimes the why never shows up. It just leaves footprints through testimony, evidence, and statements that don't quite fit inside the rules. A voice with no speaker, a pattern with no clear cause, a violence that stays close to home, documented, stamped, filed away like it's finished. But curses don't care about legal closure. They don't recognize verdicts. They don't respect jurisdiction. Because if something truly lives in a bloodline, you can't cross-examine it. You can't sentence it, and you definitely can't outrun it. So tonight, as the world quiets down, remember this. Some families have records, others have patterns, and few have both. If you ever find yourself digging through your own history looking for answers, be careful what you uncover. Because some things weren't buried to be forgotten, they were buried to keep them from continuing. Sleep carefully, because whatever your family has documented might not be the whole story. November 13th, 1974, the house at 112 Ocean Avenue. 6 members of the DeFeo family found dead in their beds. The official police reports noted something that still doesn't sit right. All victims were found lying face down in their beds. There are no signs of struggle. Let that settle in. 6 people. Gunshots loud enough to wake neighbors. And yet, no one ran, no one fought, no one even got out of bed. When Ronald DeFeo Jr. was questioned, officers recorded inconsistencies, shifting explanations, and one detail that refused to go away. Defendant states he heard voices instructing him. Police didn't write evil, they write defendant states. But the implication is still there. Like something else was present, but never booked. 1912, Iowa. The Villisca Axe murders. 8 people killed in a single home. Police documentation includes details that investigators struggle to explain even then. All victims appear to have been slain while asleep. Again, sleeping, a whole house, unaware. And this and then this detail recorded at the scene. A kerosene lamp chimney was removed and placed at the foot of the bed. Not theft, not necessity, placement. Intentional, ritualistic, some would later argue. And here's where it leans towards something darker than a single night. The case was never solved. No clear suspect, no clear suspect, no closure, just a house and a family line that ended in silence. Sometimes a curse doesn't continue, sometimes it finishes the job. 1922 Germany, the Hinterkaifeck murders. A family of six murdered on a remote farm. Police reports include statements from neighbors that read like a warning signs no one understood in time. The owner reported footsteps in the attic days before the murders, and newspaper from Munich found on the property, not purchased by the family. Someone had been there before the killings, living above them, watching. And then the most unsettling detail recorded by investigators. The livestock had been fed after the murders. Whoever did it stayed, moved through the house, continued routines like the family hadn't been erased, just replaced. Not a crime of passion, something colder, something that didn't rush. Modern policing has a term that feels clinical enough to hide how disturbing it really is. Family annihilator. Cases where one person kills their entire family. Police reports across multiple cases often include eerie similar phrasing. Subject displayed calm demeanor following incident. Calm. Not shock, not panic, calm. And in more than one documented interrogation summary, suspects stated they felt detached, as if observing themselves. Observing. Like the body was present, but something else was driving. Different families, different states, different decades, same language, same pattern, same distance. Police calls it dissociation, but dissociation doesn't explain why it happens in such familiar, similar ways so often within the same bloodlines. If you read enough police reports, one phrase starts to echo. No signs of forced entry. It shows up in cases where it shouldn't. Homes where something terrible happened, but nothing broke in. Which leaves only a few possibilities. They were let in, they were already inside, or there was never anything to let in at all. And when violence happens inside a family, that line takes on a different weight because blood doesn't need to force entry, it already has access. Police reports are supposed to end things. They document, they conclude, they file the chaos away into something manageable, but sometimes they just describe the shape of something they can't name. A family that didn't wake up, a voice no one could locate, a presence that didn't leave when the crime was done. And over again, it stays close. Inside homes, inside relationships, inside bloodlines. Because whatever this is, it doesn't travel far. It doesn't need to. So tonight, think about this. If something followed a family, would it look like a haunting? Or would it look like a series of unexplained incidents filed neatly in different decades, under different names? Because the scariest thing about these reports isn't about what they say, it's what they don't. No motive, no explanation, no clear end, just documentation, proof that something happened, without ever explaining why it keeps happening. Because whatever leaves evidence behind like this doesn't always leave. And if it ever chose a family to follow, it wouldn't need to find you. It would just wait until you were born. Early 1800s, Barbados, the Chase Vault, a sealed burial vault belonging to the Chase family. Heavy stone, locked door, no signs of tampering, and yet, every time it was opened, the coffin's head moved, not slightly, violently. Stacked, thrown, rearranged like something inside had grown tired of lying still. Officials documented it, inspected the vault, reset the coffins carefully, sealed it again, and when they returned, chaos. Again. One account describes the coffins were displaced in a manner no human force could achieve within the confined space. No theft, no vandalism, just a family that couldn't stay at rest. Even in death, they weren't done moving. St. Louis, Missouri, the Lemp family built a brewing empire, then slowly collapsed under something far less explainable. Over the years, multiple family members died by suicide, others experienced sudden mental decline. The family mansion became synonymous with unease. This wasn't a single event, it was a pattern, generation after generation unraveling. And what makes it linger in the shadows of cursed territory isn't just the deaths, it's the reputation. Same house, same family, same ending in different years. Like the story refuses to change, no matter who played the role. Pennsylvania, 1970s, 80s, this mural haunting is often overshadowed by bigger paranormal headlines. But look closer. It starts to feel less like a house problem and more like a family problem. The Smurl family reported physical attacks, voices mimicking loved ones, a presence that followed them even when they left the home. That last part matters because hauntings aren't supposed to stay put. Addresses, locations, buildings. This one didn't. It traveled, attached, like it knew exactly who was supposed to stay with, not where, who. Italy, 15th century origin. They say. The legend of Bassano vase tells of an object's path through generations, bringing death to each owner. But here's the detail that twists it into bloodline territory. Many accounts suggest it wasn't random collectors who suffered most. It was those tied to the original lineage of the bride who first owned it. Deaths that followed inheritance, not possession, inheritance. Like the object wasn't the curse, just a delivery system. But sometimes a curse doesn't need to stay in one place. It just needs something to carry forward. This one doesn't have a famous name, no headline, no documentary, just archived under medical and psychological notes from the late 20th century case. A family reported recurring nightmares across 3 generations, not similar nightmares, the same ones. A figure standing at the foot of the bed, leaning closer each time it appeared, until eventually it climbed in. One clinic, clin, clinic, clinician documented this shared detail. Each subject describes the entity approaching in identical stages despite no prior discussion, stage by stage, like a script, like something rehearsing across decades. And here's the part that doesn't sit right. The youngest child begins describing the final stage before the others had ever experienced it, not memory, not influence, progression. Like whatever this was getting closer with each generation. There are obscure regional accounts in rural Japan of families who quietly abandon homes, not because of visible danger, but because of repetition. One such pattern involves a specific room where multiple family members across generations reported seeing the same woman, illness that affected only those who slept in that room. Journals left behind describing identical encounters decades apart. No official case name, no media coverage, just fragments. Entries like, she knows which one of us it is, not who we are, which one. Like, selection mattered. Like, it wasn't random. And eventually, the family line stopped living there. But not before leaving records behind, not to explain, just to warn. The famous cases get attention, they get cleaned up, packaged, explained away, but these stay messy, unsolved, uncomfortable, because they don't just suggest something happened, they suggest something is ongoing. A vault that wouldn't stay still, a family that kept ending the same way, a presence that followed instead of stayed, a nightmare that evolved. No fame, no answers, just patterns, repeating quietly in the dark. And maybe that's the real reason these cases stay obscure. Not because they are less frightening, but because they're harder to dismiss. So tonight, remember this. The scariest curses aren't the ones everyone knows. They're the ones that never need attention to survive. They just need time and a family to continue them. Because if something like this exists, it doesn't need to find the world, it just needs to find a bloodline and stay there. In certain rural regions of Tuhaku, there are whispered accounts of families where firstborn sons simply don't last. Not always violently, not always suddenly, but consistently enough it stops being called tragic and starts being called expected. Local folklore sometimes ties some of these patterns to broken shrine obligations, ancestors who once served at a local kami and then stopped. No ritual closure, no apology, just abandonment, and in return, a quiet correction. Records from village and registries show firstborn sons dying young across multiple generations, subsequent children living normal lives, family lines continuing, but never through the first branch. Like something is pruning the tree, not killing a family, just shaping it. And the elders in those regions don't dramatize it. They say things like, sometimes lines aren't allowed to begin twice. In older accounts from Shikoku, there are mentions of what locals sometimes call Kaori Muzume, the returning daughter, a pattern where every few generations a girl is born into a family who knows a layout of ancestral homes she's never visited, recognizes relatives in old photos instantly, speaks in outdated dialects not used in her household. At a first glance, it sounds like reincarnation folklore, but here's the unsettling detail. These daughters often show fear of a specific room or location tied to a past death within the family before anyone tells them, before they could know. One archive note from a regional folklorist describes a child saying, "That's where she waited for me last time. Not died, not lived, waited." Like something in the family line didn't just return, it anticipated. Coastal families near parts of Wakayama have long carried quiet warnings about the sea, not storms, not tides, Something more personal. Generational accounts describe individuals who feel like an unexplainable pull towards the ocean, repeated drownings within the same families, often under calm conditions, reports of hearing familiar voices calling from the water. Some connect this to lingering forces like the Funai Yore, but localized, personal, not random spirits, specific ones, tied to specific families. One recorded account notes a man who, before walking into the water, reportedly said they've been waiting long enough. Not confusion, not panic, recognition. Like answering a call that had been ringing across generations. In Italy, deep in the rural Calabria, there are accounts of families abandoning homes over something that sounds almost too simple to be terrifying: a room. Just one. Across generations, members reported seeing the same seated figure at the edge of the bed, hearing their name spoken in voice of the deceased relatives, falling ill only after sleeping in that one specific space. The detail that lingers, description of the figure never change. Decades apart, different witnesses, same posture, same presence. One journal entry recovered from a vacated home reads, "It doesn't follow us, it waits for us to return." And that's the difference. Some curses chase, others hold their ground and trust that blood will bring you back. Italy has a well known concept of the evil eye, malocchio, but in certain lesser known family accounts from Sicily, this isn't a one time curse, it's inherited. Not cast again, just continued. Family reports patterns like chronic misfortune tied specifically to moments of success, illness that appears immediately after milestones, children ex- exhibiting the same marked sensitivity as older relatives. Attempts to remove it through traditional rituals sometimes fail, repeatedly, as if the curse isn't sitting on the individual but anchored deeper. One practitioner reportedly told a family after multiple failed cleansings, "This isn't on you, it's in you." Not helpful, accurate, maybe, comforting, not even a little. In both rural Japan and southern Italy, there are scattered accounts never formally connected but eerily similar. Families who share dreams, not themes, not feelings, scenes, specific locations, specific figures, same sequence of events across different households, different generations, sometimes even different countries after migration. One Italian case describes siblings dreaming of a staircase that led nowhere. Years later, visiting an abandoned family property, they found it exactly as they had seen it. Neither had been there before, and when asked how they recognized it, one answered simply, "We've been here longer than we've been alive." Let that sink for a second. These aren't famous, they don't have names that echo through history. They don't get movies or headlines. They're just persistent, quietly, through birth records, through habits no one questions, through rooms no one uses, through instincts no one can explain. Japan teaches that grudges can outlive death. Italy teaches that curses can root themselves behind. The curses can root themselves in blood. Put them together, and something that doesn't need to announce itself, it just continues. So tonight, Think about your own line, not just where you're from, but what might actually come with it. Because if something ever attached itself to your family, it would need to haunt a place. It wouldn't need to prove it exists. It would just wait, generation after generation, patient, quiet, until someone finally notices the pattern. And by then, it's already a part of you. Because the oldest curses don't make noise, they make tradition. So, why are some families cursed, it seems? Theory 1, the debt that never got paid. Some curses don't start with malice, they start with transaction. Across cultures, there are stories of ancestors who made deals they didn't fully understand. Land for protection, power for loyalty, survival at a cost they assumed would be temporary. But nothing ancient deals in short term contracts. The idea here is simple and horrifying. A debt was created, and instead of being paid once, it accrues interest in descendants, not punishment, collection. That would explain why the pattern doesn't hit randomly, why it feels targeted, intentional, because to whatever keeps the ledger, you're not a new person, you're an installment. Genetic memory with teeth. Science offers something cleaner. Epigenetics, inherited trauma, behavior imprinting. Your body remembers what your mind never experienced. Fear responses, stress patterns, even tendencies towards certain behaviors. But here's where the theory starts to warp under its own weight. What if a memory doesn't just store emotion? What if it stores experience? Not metaphorically, literally. Not your ancestor was afraid of water, but your body remembers drowning. That would explain cases where people recognize places they've never been, fear things they've never encountered, react to stimuli with with familiarity instead of surprise. Science calls Science calls it inheritance. Folklore calls it something else, a door. Because if memory can pass through blood, who says something else can't hitch a ride with it? Theory 3, attachment, not to you, but to the line. Most hauntings are described as location based. A house, a battlefield, a place where something happened. But bloodline cases suggest something different. Attachment to identity. Not your house, not your belongings, your lineage. Some theories suggest certain entities don't bind to spaces, they bind to continuity. Families, pro- Families provide that. A stable thread through time. Generations after generation, the same signal repeats. Same DNA mark, same name, same ancestral imprint. To something non human that might look less like different people and more like the same being continued, like one long organism. So it doesn't need to follow you, it just stays connected to the thread. And wherever that thread goes, so does it. The first incident theory. Every pattern has a starting point, and sometimes that starting point isn't random. It's violence, a murder, a betrayal, a death that wasn't just tragic, it was unresolved. In many traditions, this creates something dangerous. A grudge without closure. Entities like Onryo are built on this idea, not just angry, but anchored. And if that anchor points is tied to a person, then their descendants become extensions of that anchor, not guilty, just connected. Which means the curse isn't following a family. The family is still standing in the original blast radius. generation after generation. Theory 5. Pattern reinforcement, the curse you feed. Here's one people don't like because it suggests participation. What if curses don't just exist? What if they're maintained? Families pass down more than genetics, they pass down behavior, violence, silence, addiction, fear. And over time, those patterns start to look intentional. Like something is steering them, but maybe it doesn't need to. Maybe it just nudges, amplifies, rewards repetition until the family becomes a machine that produces its own curse. Not because something is controlling them, but because something is encouraging them. And once a pattern is strong enough, it doesn't need a source anymore. It sustains itself. Theory 6, the parasite model. Let's make it darker. What if a curse isn't mystical at all? What if it's biological? Not in the way we understand biology, but something adjacent. A parasitic presence that attaches to a host, an ancestor, embeds itself into the lineage, transfers through reproduction, not feeding on blood, but on emotion, conflict, fear, trauma. That would explain why cursed families often experience repeated emotional extremes, high conflict environments, cycles of destruction, because from the parasite's perspective, that's food. And what better way to guarantee survival than to embed yourself in a system that keeps creating more hosts? A family is the perfect ecosystem. Theory 7, the universe correcting itself. Now, zoom out. Way out. There's a theory that certain bloodlines accumulate imbalance. Too much power, too much influence, too much deviation from some unseen equilibrium. And if something corrects it, not morally, mathematically, like the equation balancing itself out over time. That could explain families like the Kennedy family, where success and tragedy seem to rise together like twin flames. Not punishment, not intention, just correction. Cold, impersonal, inevitable. So which is worse? A debt being collected? A memory that carries more than it should? An entity riding your bloodline like a current? A pattern you're unknowingly feeding? Or something so large it doesn't even know you exist? Just that you're part of the equation. Here's the uncomfortable truth. It might not be just one. And that what makes bloodline curses so effective. They don't need a single explanation. They just need to keep working. So now you're left with a different kind of question. Not are curses real, but if something was following your family, how would you even know which theory to fight? And worse, what if the way you've been living your life, the habits you didn't question, the patterns you assumed were normal? What if those weren't random at all? What if that's exactly how it survives? Not by chasing you, not by scaring you, but by becoming something you've never think to resist, something familiar, something inherited, something that feels like you. Sleep carefully, because if a curse ever figured out how to look like a personality, you wouldn't run from it. You'd protect it and pass it on. So here we are at the end of the episode, but not the end of the story, because Bloodlines don't do endings. They do sequels. Messy ones, unasked for, usually with a higher body count. You've heard cases, the whispers, The pattern that might repeat like a song stuck in a throat that doesn't belong to you. And maybe right now, you're doing what everyone does, telling yourself, yeah, creepy, but not my family. Of course not. Every cursed bloodline thinks it's just having a rough few centuries, just bad luck, just coincidence, just a long, unfortunate streak of what are the odds? Spoiler, the odds are you. Because if there's one thing curses understand better than we do, it's patience. They don't rush, they don't panic, they don't need to prove anything tonight. They just sit back, generation after generation, watching a family tree grow, waiting to see which branch snaps next. And here's the part no one likes to say out loud. If something is following your bloodline, then statistically speaking, congratulations. You're not the exception, you're the update. But don't worry, we're not done yet. Next episode, we're not just talking about curses anymore, we're talking about the people who tried to break them. The rituals that almost worked, the ones that made things worse, and the very thin line between cleansing a curse and waking it up. Because nothing gets angry quite like something that was finally left alone. So until then, be nice to your relatives, even the weird ones, especially the weird ones. They might not just be family, they might be containment. Sleep well, or at least pretend to. Because something in your bloodline just heard this episode, it's probably not offended, it's just taking notes.